stop that for the moment. So hi, everybody. It is 2:02 p.m., so we'll go ahead and get started. I am Mark Litwicki. I hope everyone can hear and see me. Thanks for coming. Today's event, as I will put on the PowerPoint here in just a moment, is called Working with First Generation Students. So the setup here today will be that I'll do a little bit of introduction, which I'm doing right now. And then we have some panelists and they will introduce themselves. And then I have some questions just to kind of keep just to get the conversation going. But at any time, if you have a question or if you want to jump in with ask for a clarification or anything like that, please feel free to do so, or an observation or whatever might be relevant. Okay, so I'm going to start with an anecdote today from my own experience. I was a first generation college student myself, and I didn't really realize that or didn't think about it until I think I was probably at least a sophomore, maybe a junior, and I went for tutoring at my university and discovered that if you were a first generation college student, you didn't have to pay. And I guess other people had to pay. And I really didn't see how that could be relevant at all, but I was happy to not pay. About maybe the same year or the year after that, by the way, I'm sure that tutoring was in math because that was the one thing that prevented me from progressing. But on sort of a connected note, it took me until I think my junior year to figure out that college meant that you were supposed to be taking specific classes in a specific order, and that's why it took me 5 years to graduate. And I think there was maybe a connection there with me being a first generation student that somehow no one ever told me that you were supposed to be taking specific classes. So so that's what we're here to talk about, first generation college students. And I have a couple of just quick details here for us. See if this thing's going to work. First of all, I wanted to point out that our panelists today are Olga Arias and English, Marisol Campos Garcia in student activities, and Amanda Young, who is welding faculty. So first of all, a definition quickly: first generation college student is a student whose parent or parents did not complete a 4-year college or university degree. That's the standard definition. A little bit of college doesn't really qualify for, if parents did a little bit of college or something, that doesn't really qualify a student to not be first generation. Some statistics here. Why should we care? What does it matter? Well, graduation rate for first gen students at open admission schools is below half that of for non-first generation. They do better in selective schools and schools that have to, where they have to really compete to get into. But in general, first generation students have very much lower success rates. It's not just about socioeconomic level, by the way. Even when you control for family income, first generation students are still less likely to graduate, significantly less likely. First generation students also do significantly less well once they graduate. And I'm going to show you a graphic on that in just a second. Somehow these got out of order. But Morton, another reason why we should care, we have somewhere around 70, maybe a little bit less of our students are first generation. So it's a solid majority of Morton College students. And this is just the graphic I mentioned. This one, I've studied this stuff myself, and this one actually I didn't realize, and it sort of surprises me, just the extent of the difference here. So that even out of school, even after college, first generation students do significantly less well economically than their peers who are not first generation students. So that's my intro. Now I'm going to introduce our panelists. So let me just make sure who is here with us. So our first panelist, who I believe is here, is Amanda Young. Amanda, you're here. Yeah, there's
Hi there.
Hi, Amanda. And then we have Marisol Garcia.
Hello, everyone.
Who is from our Student Activities Office. And we were going to have Olga Arias, but I don't see her on here. Maybe she'll be joining us later. So if we can start, maybe Marisol, you can tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do here at the college, and then we'll get into the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Marisol Campos Garcia. I'm the Student Activities Assistant through the Student Activities Office here at Morton College. I also serve as the Undocumented Student Liaison. First generation college student for both undergrad and also my master's. I'll, of course, get more into detail about what that experience was like, but ultimately was able to receive my bachelor's at UIC, Political Science Communications, and my master's in Public Administration. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you. And Amanda.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Young. I'm the full-time welding faculty here at Morton College. I'm a first-generation college student. I completed my bachelor's degree at Governor State University. I completed an MBA through Grand Canyon University, and now I'm pursuing a PhD. So I've been an educator for about 5 years and working in the trades for a little over 15.
Nice, thank you. And so we've got quite a nice sized group here, 13 people so far. And again, I'm going to try and keep an eye out for if Olga joins us. We'll introduce her, but I don't see her here. Okay, so I have some sort of guiding questions for everybody. But once again, feel free to jump in, interrupt, ask for clarification, throw in your own observations, and so on. But for our panelists, Amanda and Marisol, the first question is this. When you were a student, how aware were you of being a first generation student? As I pointed out, it took me until somebody actually offered me something for free on the basis of me being one. That's when that's the first time it ever even occurred to me that was a thing. So how aware were you of being a first gen student? Was this something that was on your radar? And if so, was there some incident or situation that made you aware of it? So who's going to go first? Amanda.
I guess I'll hop in here. I had no idea. I had no idea whatsoever until later on in my college years. And I guess I didn't really realize it until I was talking to some of my friends' parents who were college educated, and the experience of having a conversation with them about college was way different than having a conversation with my parents. And also, I look back now and I realize that I ended up kind of surrounding myself with other first generation students and I didn't even know it. And then now looking back, it took me 9 years to finish my bachelor's degree. And I think that I struggled with that. So I wasn't really aware of it until later.
I think for me, I learned pretty early on in high school. It was maybe my junior year where we were studying at that time, it was the ACT, and my parents were always stressful of education. Unfortunately, they were never able to get a college education themselves, but they always stressed upon my brother and I to always strive for education, try to do everything they can in their potential to be able to remove any kind of challenges or barriers. The only thing that I found is that they didn't know how to help us. They didn't know what kind of resources were out there outside of the school. So they really relied on us to kind of self-advocate for ourselves. And they did their best by taking us to tours or even enrolling me into a college prep course, the ACT prep courses. So that's where I really found out that I was first gen, and I didn't really know what that meant. Because I feel like a lot of people around me, including into my family, it was kind of a norm. It was more an extraordinary thing to be in college and to graduate. So that was kind of something I was able to surround myself with. So I didn't really know what that was like until in high school. There was just a diverse group of students, and a lot of students who were from a different demographic. They had family members who are already helping their student or my peers with college and, traveling, you know, all across the US, whereas I was more local in the US. And so I really spent a lot of time within my advisor's office, just asking any questions about something as simple as, how do you apply to college? How do you know what to look for? How do you know when deadlines are due? So I definitely made my college counselors my best friends my junior and senior year, just because it was something that I knew that my parents were super supportive of, but unfortunately they couldn't provide a little bit more information about that. Even just in conversation, the way I knew that I was first gen is once I became a junior senior, a lot of terms that are pretty common to me now were very foreign to me. Something as simple as a commuter student. I remember when I was doing applications, my advisor, she would go through the application with me and she would ask me, are you going to be dorming or are you going to commute? And I would just answer yes. And of course, we all know it's not a yes or no question. It's really, are you going to stay on campus or are you going to be going from school to home, vice versa? I had no idea what that meant. Sometimes I would feel embarrassed to ask, but that's where I really knew that, wow, there's a huge division of knowledge that was coming across.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just listening to a conversation with my office mate and one of his students the other day, and apparently he's using some materials on, just kind of like what you need to know to be a student and so on. And they were talking about the difference between matriculate and register and enroll and things like this. And I was like, yeah, I was probably in grad school before I ever knew that stuff. And this point that Amanda, that you brought up, I think it's so relevant in ways that are even deeper, that when you would see your friends whose parents had gone to college, it was like, oh, okay, so they know what's going on or what you're going through. The other thing about that is, and certainly in my experience, I found that the more educated I got, the less like my parents I got, which meant, of course, more and more friction. And that's just a whole other life thing going on. I had a friend whose dad was a professor at the local university. Well, the farther he went in school, the more he had in common with his parents. And that was, instead of being a source of friction, it was a source that brought them together. And I think that that's something that first generation students really often have to deal with, the farther you go in school, the farther away from your parents that takes you in certain ways. And it can take years to really kind of breach that gap. Okay. If anyone has anything to throw in here, once again, the invitation is open.
I think just speaking to, to that, it's really important to kind of, I guess, realize that, we go to our parents when we're younger because they have experience and they have this knowledge. And when our parents haven't had this experience of college, the frustrating part of my experience was that, I would try to talk to my mom and my dad, and they're like, you just have to do well. Just do well in college and it will be all good. And I'm like, well, it's a little more complicated than that. And, to them, being able to send me to college, to pay for at least part of it was a huge deal for them. And they felt like that was their measure of success. We were able to do this for her. So now all she has to do is get good grades. And it turns out that there's a lot of other things that have to be considered as a college student, like what do you want to major in? What are you good at? Where's your skill set at? Just so many different things that we never talked about that. We just talked about getting accepted to college and going.
Yeah. But with my mom, it was just fill out the financial aid forms. That was the main thing. Just, you have to do that. And, whatever happens after that, you're on your own. But But, and I'm glad she did push me to do that.
Yeah.
Because I certainly would not have done it if it was up to me. But that was really kind of the extent of her understanding of what going to school entailed. You gotta get financial aid for one thing, and beyond that, show up, and then yeah, you're on your own. So
Yeah,
okay,
if I
go
could
ahead.
jump in, I definitely agree and kind of like have the same experience as Amanda. Again, it was just something where my parents, they would tell me the same thing, right? They'll say, do well, make sure you ask questions and, seek out resources. And I'm just so used to, being younger, they will help guide me, right? Or they will come to me with meetings with instructors or principals or anything like that. So really having to like journey off alone was kind of intimidating, kind of scary, but I think it helped when I was able to see like who my network was on campus. But I think even then, just the understanding, I remember, and my mom says this a lot with like to her friends or anybody who now has, their children coming off to college, is that at first, when I first started going to college, something like all-nighters, sometimes they will become a norm. My mom just never understood. She's like, why are you going to sleep past 3 a.m. and waking up at 8? Like, that's not healthy. You can't do that. But it was just something that I would kind of like explain to her. And it's just something as a barrier, like wouldn't understand. Like, it's not that I wasn't doing my homework. It wasn't that I wasn't doing well. It was just a lot of work, a lot of just balance, a lot more just pressure to do well. I remember when I first started college, I was actually a bio major. I wanted to go into pre-vet and I wanted to become a veterinarian. That later changed after my first chemistry class. And it was intimidating trying to talk to my parents, just kind of explain to them what does that mean, right? And just the fear of disappointing them, because they also helped support me through college. And I didn't know at that point. I was questioning, what does this mean? Do I have to drop out, right? Do I have to continue on with this major? But does that mean that, I have to just continue to do poorly? Like I would be in tutoring, I was doing all the right things, but I just couldn't get through chemistries or bio classes. So it wasn't until I was finally able to come to terms with my parents, and I was very surprised. It was a lot more. I felt that I was like perceiving that they would be disappointed, that they would be upset, that they would be mad, where actually they understood, right? They didn't have that experience themselves, but they said, you know what, if it doesn't work for you, you'll find something else that will work for you. Just keep, as in Spanish, we say, síguele echándole ganas, keep going forward, keep putting more effort towards it.
Yeah, and it's very common also with a lot of students that, as a faculty member, I see this all the time where, parents will say something like, your cousin's first communion is this weekend, so that's what we're doing. And, and the kid will be like, well, I have a big test or I have a big essay that's due. Well, so you're saying family's not important, so it really kind of creates this kind of tension. I would like to know anyone else who's here right now wants to throw in if they have similar experiences or questions. Brian had his hand up. Go ahead.
I just thought this was timely. Last night I had a 3-hour night course and we had rough drafts due. And there's one student, first generation, who's had trouble getting to school, getting prepared. And I decided to walk him over to the tutoring center while the rest of the students were working on peer review. So I got to talking to him and he said, yeah, my dad is, not real happy with the arrangement that I'm taking classes this fall. In fact, he thinks I'm wasting my time. So it was like, that's a hard thing to hear, because as faculty, we kind of become symbolic of this,
Yeah.
this divisive or this forbidden territory. So
You
it's
are
very,
driving a wedge between your students and their parents.
yeah, it's very real. It's very pervasive. So I'm glad you brought attention to it.
And this, there's another issue which has to do with, male students. I don't know about you guys, and I don't know what the actual statistics are right now, but boy, in my classes anyway, and I have pretty full classes, men are a very rare commodity. And I think it might have to do with that. Maybe and it seems to me that it's gotten more pronounced, but it probably has to do with that. That hey, you should be out in the workforce making some money instead of messing around over at the college. And I know, for example, in my case, um, my father had no interest whatsoever in encouraging. It was my mom entirely. As far as he was concerned, go get a job and contribute. So I think that, yeah, a lot of students have that kind of pressure. Anybody else? Okay. Well, the next thing, moving along here, just asks you to think about and talk about what specific ways being a first generation student shaped or affected your experience in college. And if you have, just how we've already talked about quite a bit of that, I think. And I honestly, I think there's going to be a lot of overlap with these questions, but in what ways did being a first gen student shape or affect your experience as a college student?
So I think I can contribute a little more to this. I think, being a first generation student, I had no idea what kind of careers were out there. I knew my parents being blue collar themselves. It's funny, I'm a welding instructor now, and I run a company that we work in the trades. And my parents were so against that. They thought that because they were blue collar and they were able to help me get into college, they did not want me to end up doing what they're doing. And I ended up taking over their business. So I kind of came full circle, but, I knew that I wasn't supposed to be in the trades, but I had no idea what was out there. I didn't think I was smart enough to be a doctor. Certainly didn't think I was smart enough to be a lawyer. So I kind of lacked that confidence. And so I thought, well, I guess I'll be a teacher or I'll be a nurse. And so I didn't know what the resources were at the school to help me figure out where my skill sets were what I excelled in. And so I bounced around from major to major for so long. I felt like I wasted a lot of time. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that I was scared to reach out. I thought I had to do it on my own. And I didn't really have that support system outside of school to help me navigate that.
Well, yeah, you're hitting like a lot of really important points there, especially that scared to reach out, like scared to say, I need help making this decision or knowing what my choices are. And by the way, I mean, it seems to me that statistic where, people, first generation students earn significantly less once they get out of school, surely it's at least partly because of this question of like, first of all, I'm not smart enough to do this, or, I don't have those kind of dreams, or I can't, this is not realistic for me, for a person like me. And second of all, as you say, Amanda, switching majors a couple of times just puts you behind, and then you're entering the workforce later, and all those things tend to have long-term effects. Marisol, you were.
Yeah, I think for me, it really, I guess, shaped me to be more of an advocate for myself. As I mentioned earlier, it was really difficult just knowing what there is, because of course, like I didn't know what I needed to know, right? So because of that, I wasn't asking the right questions, or I wasn't asking any questions regarding how to get the resources or services I needed to either get into college and matriculate into college. But because of that, I really used my experience to be able to share with others. I remember in high school, something as simple as getting fee waivers for applying to different colleges. I didn't know that was an opportunity, right? I was worried about limiting my opportunities of applying because a lot of scholarships didn't cover application fees, and a lot of the applications were anywhere from $30 to $50. So once I expressed that to my counselor was able to provide me with that resource of getting fee waivers. I didn't keep that a secret, right? I shared it with my friends, I shared it with my classmates. just because I knew, if that's a resource, an opportunity to take advantage of, I just imagine, if I didn't know about it, I'm sure a lot of my peers didn't do it. And I kind of follow that same mentality along the way. That's eventually why I ended up shifting from pre-veterinary science to now working in higher education. I navigated college not knowing what I wanted to do. Same thing, bouncing around different majors, kind of seeing what would hit, but also worrying about what's going to be well worth, my money, right? Making sure that I have employability after, that I'm able to, get paid decently. And I feel like even now, I just make sure whenever I talk to students, even if it's something that they've heard, I always make sure to just mention different resources or services, just reiterating like a checklist of things for them to consider, just because I know when I was in their shoes, there were just so many things that I felt maybe instructors or counselors thought I knew, whereas I didn't, and it could have definitely been a lot more helpful to help me with my experience.
Yeah, and a big part of that is, hate to quote Donald Rumsfeld, and most people won't remember this at this point anyway, but the whole thing, the things we know, the things we don't know, and the things we don't know that we don't know. And that's the problem, that when you're first generation, there are all these things that you don't know, you don't you don't realize that you don't know these important things. Marisol, you talk about your counselor, and I think you were really lucky to have a good some counselor that was able to give you that kind of information, and that gets to a whole other point here, and that has to do with quality of counseling and quality, that students coming from, especially in Illinois, where we have like the worst, the most regressive public school funding in the country, I believe, where a school like New Trier or these higher end schools, they're spending 10, I don't know exactly, I used to have the numbers, but they're spending massively more per student than, say, Morton East High School is spending. Well, that means, among many other things, that you have X number of students per counselor versus over at Morton, where you have maybe X times 10 number of students per counselor to get that, so they just don't have the time to help students navigate that system. And the other thing has to do with just the system. It's such a game. I went through public, undergraduate and my master's as well, and I never knew. Then I worked for a number of years at a community college. Then I got a job at Loyola, which was my first and only experience at a kind of private place. And I remember being in meetings with admissions, because I was the director of a program, and they would say things. I'll go, "What's the discount rate for your students?" And I said, "What do you mean? What is that?" Well, turns out, in expensive schools, when they say it's $30,000 a year, rich people know that's the starting gambit. Then we get some offers and we start making deals. If you're not in, if your parents don't know that, or if somebody doesn't know that, it's like 30 grand a year. I can't do that. I'm out of here. You're not even going to apply, and it's a gatekeeping thing. That's how they prevent too many people from applying. And it's really quite shameful, if you ask me, that students from wealthy backgrounds very often end up paying less because they know how to negotiate. They say, okay, well, we have this offer and this offer. What are you guys going to give us? Because this kid is, a great student and you want him or her. So yeah, there's definitely a lot in the system that is seriously stacked against students who don't have advocates. And Marisol, you talk about advocating for yourself. That if a student doesn't have a parent who knows how to play the system, or a counselor who has reasonable amount of time to dedicate to that student, then yeah, they're always going to be at a disadvantage. Does anyone else want to throw in on this?
Yeah, I am speaking to, excuse me, speaking to, financing college. As a first gen student, I had no idea how to navigate that. So I was lucky enough that my parents were able to help with some. But, as I continued on, through my 9 years of undergrad and through my master's and now, my PhD, I had no idea how to finance that when I couldn't afford to pay for it. And so the only thing I knew about or thought I understood were student loans. And so I think there's a lot of other opportunities for students to finance their education outside of that. And I had no clue about it. And, and also, the navigating a student loan when you have one, understanding what it means to take on that loan, the financial implications, having a plan in place to pay for it. I mean, it's just, it was really messy for a long time for me.
Yeah, and you're certainly not alone in that. Sam, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question. So I'm thinking about like the advisors, those are a really important resource for first generation students to learn about the resources that are at the college or the programs that are available. And I was just wondering, as first generation students, if you felt there were any sort of like classroom interventions that you wish had happened as you were going through school, like the professors in your classrooms had pointed you to resources or anything that you wish they would have covered or talked about, so that I know I'm not an advisor. Part of my role is to help advise, but I don't know all of the resources. But I wondered if there's anything about the classroom that you would have benefited about hearing, or something along those lines.
Sure. I think it would have been very helpful for me to have more information presented by my instructors. I realize that a lot of classes, you have a very limited amount of time to teach and, get through the material that you need to. But I feel that it would have been a lot easier to reach out to the resources available to me had my front line, my instructors presented that or made mention of it or something like that.
Yeah, I use an article in my English 088 classes, the one before English 101. And it's written by a guy who was a first generation college student and talking about what that was about. And now he ended up doing well. And he was, I think faculty at a university in the Southeast. But that usually is like the first time that students have heard about that, and of course, we know that most of them are first generation students, and that is a way to talk about these things. Audrey, you have your hand up. Audrey Steyer had her hand up.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. This is one of the advantages we have in CTE, because we actually are able to do advising with our students. And I was a first generation college student, and I lucked out because I had somebody who was a friend who basically said, and I started at a community college, go get the catalog from the school you want to transfer to and take all the courses that you would take if you were there. And that really helped me. But that was just my luck. But we were able to actually work with our students. And like you were saying, one of the things I tell my students to do is to go when the colleges are here, to go there and kind of have them present what they can do for you. Just say, okay, I'm a really good student. I want to transfer. What can you do for me? And don't just be put off, because they'll look at, like you said, they'll look at the price of Loyola or DePaul and say, oh, I can't afford that. And I said, well, you don't know that. Go talk to them. And so that is an advantage of CTE. We do have that ability. And most of my students are first generation. And but the opposite thing here, Mark, and CIS is almost nearly 100% of them are male. So I think, it depends on the area.
Me too.
Okay, so that's where the men are, but they're definitely not in English classes right now.
Well, they have to take English, so they're there sometimes, maybe evenings, Mark.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a few of them, but definitely, it's always been, probably 60-40, and now it seems it's more like 70-30 at best. But Marisol, were you going to add?
Yeah, so I do want to add on. So I think the biggest thing is having these conversations early on. I know in my experience, I didn't have them until my junior year. And even then, I felt way behind my peers. Even my senior year of college, right? I had a lot of friends who maybe they were thinking about grad school, and I was like, oh, this is the finish line for me, graduating with my bachelor's. You're telling me to continue on? Like, I don't know how to navigate that. Eventually I was able to do it, but again, it was just kind of like asking a lot of questions and navigating like different services with that. But I think conversations should take place even up into grammar school. I know for some people that may seem a little too early on, but I think just kind of having students begin to think about that long term in terms of what are some things you're interested in? How could this mean, how could this be translated into a career? How could this be translated into what you want to study? If you like math, what are some careers in math that you could potentially pursue? I say that because I actually used to work right out of college. I was a ISAC corps member with the ISAC, the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. I dedicated 2 years of my life after undergrad assisting a lot of first-gen families with navigating college and financial aid. And I'm happy to say I became the person that I wish I had when I was navigating college, just because I didn't know about FAFSA until I actually got that job in ISAC. I knew I had to provide tax information every year. I didn't know why. I didn't know how to explain my parents how their security of their financial information and their social security number were being protected. But it wasn't until I got explained FAFSA is a financial aid application, it's the federal application. The school uses it to see what kind of grants and scholarships you may qualify for. Statewide, federal-wide, you'll be seeing how much grants and loans you'll be qualified for. I felt like I needed that information when I was in college or even early on in high school, so that way I knew what to expect. Other things I felt like that could have definitely helped out outside of early outreach is support in the classroom, making best use of that time for it. So for example, even in English classes, if it's peer reviewing scholarship essays or college application essays, I know a lot of schools now, they have a minimum requirement of you need to apply to these many schools or these many scholarships. I think that's great, but also taking it a step beyond of explaining to them what are some questions that are being asked so that way they know the appropriate way to answer. So for example, as I mentioned earlier, something as simple as, are you going to be dorming or are you going to be commuting? Like many students are approaching the application still overwhelmed, still with that divide of, applying to these colleges. And also just making sure that with financial aid, that they get a head start, right? That they know that there are other options out there that they could start applying for. Something as simple as, encouraging family members to talk to their own employers and see what kind of opportunities are available through family work. That's also something that I think definitely is beneficial. And just making sure that it's not just a student getting the information, but also the family members as well. So that way it's again, making sure the full unit of support of that student has information and knowledge ready for them to be able to support their student.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and throw another question in here. We have about 20 minutes left, and we want to leave a little time for Q&A because I'm sure that all these people here all have lots of questions for us. So the next question is just, what would you like to say to our Morton College first generation students? And I'm going to combine that with another question, which would be, what can we as teachers or other college staff member working with students, what can we do to help level the playing field for these students? So what would you say to them? And we've already talked about a lot of things, actually, the steps that we can take, which I will compile later, but what more can we be doing to help level the playing field?
Get to know your students. They'll tell you their story if you listen, if you give it time. And oftentimes I find that my students have a story to tell, and there's a way that I can help them in the school or through the school, or there's something that they're unaware of. And if you listen to them, they may not know that there is a solution or there's an alternative. And if you listen to them, then you can, help them navigate the college experience better.
Yeah, I would say listening to them is definitely a great way to support students, and also just being specific in a type of support that's provided. So for example, if a student is talking about not being able to pay for their tuition for that semester, don't just say something general that, well, there's scholarships available or there's financial aid available, go talk to financial aid. I would say they are humbling themselves enough to come to you and confide in you and seeking support in you. Just become that network of support. I always tell people that it's okay to say that I don't know the answer, but I can help you. I can help you find this answer together. I feel like that's definitely okay. I feel like whenever a student does come for support, I feel like sometimes that becomes one of the biggest things is maybe an instructor, or it doesn't have to be an instructor. It could be whoever their member of support is may not know how to help. Make sure that you let them know that, you know, even if you don't know the answers, that you're there to support. If you're telling them to go seek additional support elsewhere, be specific. So for example, if you're telling them to seek for scholarships, tell them how to look for scholarships, right? Even if it's showing them what to Google or showing them an example of a scholarship and like walking through that process, I feel like being able to help them navigate these ways could definitely help out with the student. So what is that saying where you could teach a horse, you could walk a horse to a river, but you can't force the horse to drink the water, something like that. Pretty much just making sure that you're able to support the student, right? And be able to provide them the resources that are available to them.
Yeah. And that's why I like what Brian said earlier, that, you know, a student needs tutoring clearly. Well, okay, take him over there. Don't just say, oh, you know, there's tutoring over there. You know, if you're here, take them over. And I think online, the equivalent of that is, you know, give them the link, give them the thing, you know, that will get them there. I really like that point, that don't just say this, you know, X is available. Give them the information, get them there. Yeah. Brian, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick little story from last week. So I had a student from spring of 2020 who disappeared after COVID, 2-year break. I guess he didn't like learning online. He appears back on campus this fall, and he's not in my classes, but he comes to my office and we're just kind of sitting and chatting. And I find out he's interested in chemistry. I had no idea about that. He's interested in science. So in that time, we built a STEM center. So I walked him down to the STEM center, and Dr. Helmus, thankfully, was there. So I got to introduce, you know, Bruce to Sarah, and it felt like, you know, hey, a light turned on maybe. So yeah, being aware of resources on campus and physically showing them where they are, I think can really be effective.
One other point that I would like to add there too, that we can all do in our classrooms, is to point out to our students where they're doing well, or where we see a particular skill emerge. I think we spend a lot of time, you know, correcting the things that, you know, our students, you know, are doing incorrectly, and to help them along their way and grasp these other ideas and whatnot. But sometimes, you know, like going back to what I said before, when my parents just said, well, do well, just do well. You know, I focused so much on doing well that I had no idea what I was good at. I didn't know what my skill set were. It was my philosophy instructor that first was like, hey, like, this is, you need to pay attention to this. And I never once considered my skill set before that. And so I think it's really important as instructors that we're, you know, identifying, you know, these things that we see emerge from our students.
Nice. Do we have questions from all the people who are joining us here? Or I'm also interested in knowing, by the way, for the other people here, if anyone has, you know, personal experiences, either lived experiences, as they say, or with students that you'd like to share with us. So that, or questions, the floor is open. Jonathan, go ahead.
Hi there. Yeah, I just, everybody should be an adult education teacher, I think. I'm so lucky to be an adult education teacher. Just like Bryant, last night had that experience. I have both ends. I have parents who have kids in college and they didn't go to college. And then I have younger students who are maybe hopefully going to transfer. And the parent of one of the first generation students was asking me, what is art therapy? And is this a good thing? Because she's never in her life heard of art therapy. And her daughter is going to graduate with an art therapy degree from Concordia. And I was like, that's amazing. But, you know, you talk about parents and children moving apart. This parent had never heard the term art therapy before. And so that was just an example of that. And then I have a 18-year-old, 19-year-old student from Africa who, I wish I could quote it exactly. She had a wonderful little monologue about not knowing what to do. And is this normal for people? And, you know, and she said something like, and yes, that person is me, you know, like this whole thing. And it was something new to me. I think I would have, anyway, it's always something new. Like it hadn't occurred to me that a first generation student like herself would have these experiences, kind of like we're talking about, and think it's only her that doesn't know what major to take, that doesn't know, right? And that all these other students around her actually do know, right? Anyway, that is a common experience, whether you're first generation or not, right? But
probably
but
more
I think,
common with first generation.
yeah, well, I think what's real common with that I hadn't occurred to me was that feeling alone is really seemed to be the thing that set her apart. I mean, my daughter has that same issue, but she knows all kinds of other people who also have that, you know, and doesn't feel like she's the only one. But this student certainly felt like she's the only one who doesn't quite know what to do with her life or what major to take. Anyway, so thanks for letting me share my experience from last night's class.
Nice. Thank you, Jonathan. And one of the things that you bring up there, you know, is in addition to being first generation college students, a lot of our students obviously are also first or second generation people in the United States. And what that means in many cases is that their parents might not speak English. And I remember working when I was in Arizona, I would have that a lot. And if I was talking to students' parents, and it was, for me, it was a big sort of motivation to learn Spanish, because I, you know, very often felt kind of useless when I was trying to talk to kids' parents if they, you know, if we were struggling to communicate with each other. And that's, you know, that's a different issue, but it's certainly a related issue, a connected issue. Any other thoughts? Oh, Veronica, you have your hand up. Go ahead. You have your mic off.
All right, I was having trouble unlocking it there.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I am pretty new to the campus as the mentorship coordinator over in the CTE department. I really wanted to join in on this discussion. Marisol, I had actually went into her office earlier this week to discuss potentially having some type of celebration on campus for National First Generational Student Day, which is celebrated usually every November on the 8th, which just the backstory to that is because that's the day the Higher Ed Act was signed back many years ago. So it also happens to be midterm day this year. So I don't know if there's much going on campus in respect to that, but we would like to possibly do something. And I think a lot of the conversations that we're having today are things that we need to share with our students. And what I personally would like to do is highlight some of our staff members who are colleagues who are first generation students, because I think that sentiment of being alone, and I'm experiencing this by myself, can really weigh you down. I know it did for me. I am a first generation student. I'm also first generation, as you were saying, Mark, first generation Mexican American. So actually I was downstairs at a recruitment table not too long ago, and I had a student ask me, wait, which generation are you talking about? Like here in the country or as a college student? And I was like, hey, tell me your story, tell me both. So I think when we share our own stories, it takes away a little bit of that, you know? So I think the more we can share that with the students on campus, the better. So hopefully we can reach out to you guys again and have more discussions about what we could potentially do this November. If we can't do it this November, for sure, this academic year, because I do think first generation students do need to be celebrated. Just to backtrack in our conversation, I think somebody was bringing up the high cost of private tuition at private universities. I'm one of those students. I was at the top of my class and I was like, I really want to go to DePaul. And I grew up in the South suburbs. So my community college was Moraine Valley. And back in the day, I was like, oh, you can't go to just a community college, you know, go all the way. I would have saved a ton of money, but I had nobody else to lean on to say, hey, go take all of that stuff there for free and then transfer over. And then when we got through the financial aid package, I am the last in my family as well. So my parents are a lot older. So by the time I was going away, my father was already retired. So we got the package back and it was like, the cost is more than we make here at home. You're crazy. You're not going, you know? So it was a crazy conversation to have with my parents. Like, no, this is my dream. But we learned together. So I say that because ironically, a couple of weeks ago, I was presenting to a dual enrollment course. I think it was pre-law. And there was about a handful, 10 students or so that were there from both the Morton high schools. And our colleague was telling them, and I think this was such a great nugget of information that I keep sharing it, is that they're ahead of the game. So those students at Morton East and Morton West that are coming here on campus and taking courses don't realize how awesome that is and how much they're saving money. So what he did to kind of drive that point home, because they were just kind of staring off, and he's like, let me make it a little more clear for you guys. So once you would come here as a college, Morton College student, you'd be paying anywhere from $500 to $700 for this course. He's like, as a dual enrollment student, you guys are saving money, it's free. He goes, now I teach this very same class at one of the private institutions nearby. And he goes, same book that you guys have, the same quizzes, the same tests, the same PowerPoints. And he said, and now that class over there is about $2,000. So you guys are saving a lot of money. All of the students were like, wow, are you serious? So those types of conversations, those nuggets are so important for us to share with our students.
Thank you. Yeah. Prairie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go back to something that you had said earlier about the divide that happens between, potentially happens between first generation students and their parents as they embark upon their educational journey. And one of my best friends is a first generation student. And one of the things that she told me was that her her dad in particular would, you know, as she's going through her education and she's getting her degree and she got a bachelor's and a master's, he would say to her, do you think, you know, why are you getting all this education? Do you think you're better than me? And I feel like that's such a deep psychological assault on your child. And I feel like, so when, you know, and I'm certainly those who are first generation could speak to this more, but I feel like that's something that we need to be aware of as educators, that we are not just dealing with the sort of, what's the word I want to use, sort of the nuts and bolts of like how to apply for FAFSA or how to do this, which of course is difficult enough, but we're dealing with sort of maybe generational, I don't want to say it's trauma necessarily, but you know what I'm saying, just sort of like we're dealing with these kinds of parental influences that might not be encouraging. And And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is this same friend also worked full time on the weekends to support her education because her parents couldn't. And so I think we are aware that our students are probably working jobs in addition to juggling their schooling, but I think it's always important to remember like how hard they might be working outside of the classroom.
Yeah. Oh, and definitely your friend's dad and my dad were two peas in a pod. And it doesn't help when, you know, you're a smart ass kid anyway. That just kind of plays into the whole, like, yeah, you think you're better than me now, huh, Mr. Smart College kid? Does anyone else have anything else to add to this? We're kind of running up against the limit of our time.
I think to Prairie's point, you know, my father was also very much the same way. So when I came into the business to start, just to, you know, kind of add to that, when I started helping out with the business and I really got into their trade and all that, we would argue about how to manage something. And my thought processes were so different than theirs. And they would always throw it into my face that I had a leg up on them because I was able to go to college and they weren't. And I think it really speaks to, you know, this generational, you know, trauma that occurs, because I think probably everyone must have it that is a first gen student. At some point it comes up for sure.
Okay, thank you. Well, our goal here, by the way, you know, obviously there's been a lot of scholarship done on this field, and there, you know, many colleges and universities have, you know, web pages and things sort of that have compiled information for first gen students, and we don't really need to reinvent the wheel as far as that goes. But I have recorded this, and I'm going to make it. I'll send it out. I'll put it, you know, post it on YouTube and send out the link so that people who weren't able to join us today may be able to look at it if they want. And I'm going to try and compile some notes from this as well. I thank everybody who participated here very much. I do think it's a very important topic, and definitely here at Morton College, where a strong majority of our students are first generation students. You know, it's really something that we needed to be talking about before today, but it's good that we're talking about it now. So thanks everyone very much for your participation, for your contributions, for your wisdom, etc. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to the panelists.
Thanks, everyone.